Hello, and welcome to the first screencast for Chapter 2. In this chapter, we have a lot of basic material to introduce to you. In fact, mostly a lot of it is vocabulary. So if we're going to talk to each other like computer scientists, we have to start to learn how to speak the same language. And so let's start with some of the fundamentals. The first thing that we need to know is that one of the fundamental things that we'll be working with in Python is called a value. A value can be anything like a number or a word, and in fact we often refer to these values or as objects, and many times we'll use the words value and object interchangeably. And maybe one of the first and most important things to say, and something that you'll hear us say over and over again, is that in Python everything is an object. Alright, so these objects are classified into different kinds of things. Sometimes we call the way that we classify objects in Python, we call them classes. Sometimes we call them data types. Again, those are two fairly interchangeable words, and we will we'll get to the finer points of when we might say one versus another later on in the course. All right. Now, if we want to find out what type, what kind of a thing a particular Python object is, we can just use Python to tell us that directly, making use of a function called the type function. So you can see here in this example, we're going to print out the type of hello world, and we're going to print the type out of the number 17, and then we're just going to print hello world. So if I click the run button there, you'll see it tells us that this string hello world is in the class str, and this number 17 is the class int, standing for integer. In Python and all programming languages really, we make a distinction between what we call integers and floating point numbers. And the basic distinction from a syntactic point of view is just that integers don't have any decimal points in them. They're just the whole numbers, like you learned about in arithmetic class. All right. If we have a number here that's got a decimal point in it, we'll see that Python tells us that that's part of the class float. All right, now here's a little more tricky example. Notice when I run this, it says stir and stir. And you might think about that for just a second. Why does it say that both of those are strings? And the answer is that because, whether you noticed it or not, we surrounded these things that looked like numbers with the quotation marks. All right, so that's how we distinguish a string in Python, is by putting quotation marks around it. In fact, to create a string, you can use single quotes, you can use double quotes, or you can use triple quotes. And there's a number of reasons for that. One of the things that often comes up is that in writing a string, you might need to include a single quote. If you're going to put if you're going to use a single quote as an apostrophe, then you would surround your overall string with double quotes. If you're going to have a string where you are going to maybe quote somebody and want that in double quotes, then you would have the string surrounded by single quotes. And finally, in Python, if we want to have a string that's a message that may even go across several lines, we can use triple quotes, either triple double quotes or triple single quotes. All right, so here's an example where we've surrounded our overall string with triple quotes because we're both quoting somebody. Oh no, she exclaimed. Ben's bike is broken. We're quoting her again, but in this case, we're also using an apostrophe in the middle of our quote. So as we move along, we'll see lots of different examples of strings. All right, a couple more things to keep in mind is that It's very important not to think that you can use commas in your strings. That's not a legal integer. In fact, if we do this, you will see something very odd. All right, so just remember, no commas in your long numbers. Okay, another important thing is to think about changing one type into another type. And so we have some functions that we can use to convert a particular value to a particular other value. And those things happen to go by the same name that we've seen so far. We can convert something to an int by using the int function, and you can see that int function right here. We can convert something to a float using the float function, and you'll see that there. And we can convert something to a string, using the stir function. So if you just take a minute and run these examples, you'll see that in this first case we get an error because this cannot be converted to an integer. 23 bottles. In order to convert something to be an integer, it has to only contain alphanumeric. It can only contain numeric characters. It can't contain string characters. It can't contain letters. All right. So if we look at the other examples, you can see we can convert 3.14 into 3, and it does that by rounding down. In all cases, 3.999 converts to an integer of 3. 3.0 converts to 3, negative, and so on and so on. In this case, our floating point number, we are converting the string 123.45 into an actual float, and you can see both the float point number and the type of it there. And here we can see that we can convert any number into a string, and we can check its type. Okay, so to sum up this little lesson, we've really introduced 3 important data types that we'll be using throughout the class: integers, floating points, and strings. We've seen how we can create strings using double quotes, single quotes, or a triple group of quotation marks. And we've seen how we can convert one data type into another by using some type conversion functions.